Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, writer and conflict analyst Hannah Rae Armstrong, reporting from Dakar, Senegal, on the Niger Coup. Also on the program today, Ohio issue 1 at the ballot box today. Implications, well, direct implications for an abortion ban in Ohio. Implications for any future attempts to fight a gerrymandered state government, and also implications for other Republican-controlled states that may not want their voters to have a say in how they're governed. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Trump is asking the court if he can crowdsource his defense by releasing the prosecutor's evidence found in discovery. Joe Biden's Department of Labor to issue a rule reinstating important parts of the Davis-Bacon law, helping the prevailing wage law, potentially the biggest boon to construction worker pay since the 1980s. 11,000 LA city workers stage a 24-hour strike. And the Fifth Circuit panel of Trump judges halts student debt from misleading colleges. Or I should say, student debt relief from misleading colleges. New report, July, the hottest month in recorded history by far, as record glacial flooding hits Juneau, Alaska. Special effects workers at Marvel to unionize. Polls show Biden with low marks on climate change. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Newsday Tuesday.
There it is.
Yes.
Newsday Tuesday. Emma Vinglid coming right at Johnny on the spot.
Oh, yeah.
We got a lot to talk about today, folks. Wanted to bring someone on to explain to us Niger's recent coup, basically because neither one of us know really much about it at all. I know where Niger is on a map, but I probably couldn't pick it out if it was just...
And the Western press, like the mainstream, reports on this. It's really difficult to discern unless you have an expert in this field, what's true and what's not.
Is the YouTube stream down? Someone's saying, asking on the thing. I don't know. Maybe we'll check on that, but it seems okay on our end. Lot to get to today, but let's start with this. You know, this is one of those like moment of Zen clips, which is from this weekend. Mitch McConnell is not up for re-election until 2026. I think in 2024 it is Rand Paul. You'll recall like a week or so ago, or I don't know, several months ago, McConnell fell. And there's now reports that he has to travel around in a wheelchair. And about a week or two ago, there was a moment where he was in a press conference and didn't seem to, he froze and was having trouble processing stuff. They walked him away, and then he came back, I don't know, half hour later, and seemed fine, relatively speaking. It is absolutely nuts how we are led in this country by so many geriatrics. And as a near geriatric, I can tell you that, like, I understand, this is not meant to offend anybody, but it's clear that the capacity to understand when it's time for you to retire has long since passed.
And he's basically a decade younger than Dianne Feinstein, 9 years.
And also, let's also be clear, I know, like, you had Jesse Helms in there until he was something like 95 or something.
Strom
Thurmond, yeah. And so this is not a new phenomenon, but of course, we have a lot more, let's say the margin for error in the Senate is a lot tighter than it was back in those eras. But here is Mitch McConnell. And what's interesting about this is we have clips of DeSantis now and Pence turning on Trump. It's their only option. But there is a tremendous amount of dissension within the Republican Party. It's something that you expect usually in the Democratic Party because, frankly, it is got a very diverse base of voters.
Somewhat contradictory, even.
Yes, in many instances, very contradictory. There is no issue sets that you can talk about within the Republican Party. I mean, yes, some people say that they should be more hateful of Mexicans, and others say, no, we should be more hateful of, let's say, Haitians. And some Republicans feel like, well, the important thing is that we stop wokeism. And then other people are like, well, really, we do need to keep women back into the kitchen. So there is that kind of dissension within the Republican Party.
Ideas.
And but this is, to the extent that there's like dissension that is represented by different politicians, it's not issue based. It is totally sort of personality based. And here is Mitch McConnell. I've never seen anybody get booed like this. A politician get booed like this. I don't think ever.
And he's at a picnic in Kentucky.
It's called the Fancy Feast.
Okay.
In Graves County, Kentucky. Apparently the 28th straight time he's been to this event, and this is his.
Bit of a different reception.
This guy's been senator in this state for I think
almost 40 years.
Well, not my entire lifetime, but certainly as an adult. And again, I've seen politicians get booed. When I saw this, Emma put it into our Slack thing. I'm like, I'm not even gonna look at this. What's the point? And then I actually watched it, and I'm like, whoa, here. Pause it. To be clear, I want to make two things clear. One, they're cheering retire. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I want to make clear is we didn't doctor this.
No.
Right? I mean, like, this sounds like it's almost like happening in a different location.
It sounds like pandemonium. It sounds like souls in hell.
And you look at the people on stage, there's only one guy you see, and Mitch McConnell, and they both are pretending none of this is going on.
Yes. We did not put it through our sound filtration system.
That broke after we did all that work on Tim Pool's song. Go ahead, keep going.
Fancy Feast.
McConnell just try and say woke? Did he just try and say woke?
Yeah, that's passed him by.
I mean, keep going. I mean, this is amazing. And somebody's going to get fired for this. I said woke. I said woke. Why are you still booing me?
Well, that's the thing, right? That's the divide that we're talking about. I mean, McConnell, I remember before the 2020 election said that they might lose the Senate because of candidate quality, right? The presidential candidate.
Well, not just the presidential candidate. He was also worried about what's his face, Lex Luthor's inability to
yes,
to recruit good candidates.
But I'm trying to find the quote and I can't find it when he said that it was like reports that he was worried that Trump would bring about the destruction of the Republican Party, at least from like an electoral perspective. From that part is true. I mean, he was probably right about that because McConnell's like, I've done all this work to cut taxes for the wealthy and do whatever corporations want in my time as Senate Majority Leader. He's arguably been the most effective Republican politician over the past, 50 years or so?
I couldn't agree more.
So it's like, this guy's going to undo all of my ghoulish work. And I don't know if that's going to happen because the Democrats have to be as robust, and that's not the case. But for right now, the Republicans are not in good shape. Well, in terms of broader appeal to the population.
The upside for Republicans, and I should say with a caveat, I think Reagan probably was more successful as a Republican, but whatever, at least 30 years.
Right.
They've also been very good at maintaining a minoritarian rule. They have a minoritarian rule in places like Wisconsin, arguably Ohio, certainly in the Senate, or at least, while they don't have rule there, they have their numbers are far outsized relative to the population they represent. The last two presidents both won their first elections with a minority of the voters. So that's where we're at, but we'll see. All right. We're going to be talking to Hannah Rae Armstrong, reporting from Dakar, Senegal. She is a writer and a conflict analyst, and will be talking to us about the Niger coup. But first, a couple words from our sponsors. We got 3 today. One, I've gone through this before, but obviously starting about a year and a half ago, I guess, right? It's been a year and a half I've had this beard. We used to have another shaver sponsor, and I didn't need it because of I grew a beard, and I didn't want the waste that was associated with sort of like disposable razor blades and subscriptions and whatnot. And along comes Henson Shaving. They are Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace manufacturer. They've made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover. They are now bringing that level of precision manufacturing to your razor. It turns out that the discomfort that people have when they shave, whether it's like razor burn or when it's like nicks or cuts, is not a function of the razor itself being not sharp enough. Apparently that's relatively easy to do. The hard part is to make sure that the razor does not stick out the blade rather does not stick out far from the razor. And they have managed with their computer blankety blank thing that I can never remember what it's called. I have some type of mental problem with it. But Henson...
Computer numerical control.
Thank you.
CNC.
I don't know why that's so hard for me to remember. Henson makes these metal razors that extend just 0.000013 inches, less than the thickness of a human hair from the razor. That means a secure blade, which means it's not bouncy, which means that you get a very close, clean comfortable shave. The razor also has these built-in channels so you can evacuate your hairs. No more banging on the sink. These are great, and they also feel really great in your hand, and they look great. Henson Razor works with standard dual edge blades that give you that old school straight razor shave with the benefits of new school technology. And here's the thing: once you own this razor, it's only $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. No subscriptions, no obsolescence. This is it. And now they're giving my audience a 2-year supply of blades for free. So just go to hensonshaving.com/majority. That's HENSON shaving.com/majority. Add a razor and 100 pack of blades. You got to put the 100 pack of blades into the shopping cart. Then enter the code majority. You get the blades for free. Link will be in the description. Makes for a great gift.
I did.
Emma knows.
Now 2 people in my life using it. Big fans. Big fans.
I honestly, I love it. Also, sponsor today. It makes it possible for me to go out and occasionally have a drink and not come in the next day and be luggage. We all have gotten on the Z-Biotics train. Because the bottom line is I don't bounce back like I used to. I mean, it's been really decades since that. But and so I have to make a choice. Am I going to go sometimes I'll go with John Benjamin, have a couple of his Jazz Daredevil drinks. Those things are too strong.
Those are strong.
They're strong. And if I know I'm doing that, all I do is I take a Z-Biotic. It is about the size of I guess like a small bottle of almost like an energy thing. And it is a pre-alcohol probiotic. It is Z-Biotics is the first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists basically to tackle rough mornings after you drink. And here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct that's in the gut. It turns out it's this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for your rough next day. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but it does so in your gut where you need it the most. All you got to do, just remember to drink Z-Biotics before drinking alcohol. You drink responsibly, try to get a good night's sleep, feel your best tomorrow. And then once you've done that, you will find that it makes a huge difference the next day. Even the drinks the night before, I know I'll be able to come into the studio and I'll be able to do the show. That's huge for me because my kids wake me up early. There is nothing worse than feeling the pain of having drank the night before. Labor Day is right around the corner. Stock up before that long weekend. But it's great you're going to a wedding. You may know that you're going to have, you want to wake up the next morning and be able to go to the brunch or whatever it is that they do. Or I don't know. I might
need that.
Nobody ever gets. I never get invited to weddings. I've been to like 2 weddings. I can tell you at the funerals I go to. You
also drink.
Yes. But if you go to zbiotics.com/majority right now, you get 15% off your first order when you use majority at checkout. You can also sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter the time or the occasion, which I'll tell you is a good idea because I have found myself on multiple occasions finishing my Z-Biotics, and then when I know I need it, it's not there. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to go to zbiotics.com/majority. Use the code majority at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and making it possible for me to occasionally enjoy a drink or two and not have to feel it the next day. Lastly, folks know that I have some sartorial challenges. One of the things for me with my clothes was always that I didn't like to feel constrained. Mm-hmm. But then you're wearing clothes that looks like you're wearing like a parachute. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So you want it to be more fitted.
I want it to be more fitted, but I also want it to be more comfortable. And then, Roan's commuter collection shows up. And not only does Roan's commuter collection have like all the multi-way stretch or whatever they call it. It's stretchy.
4-way.
4-way stretch.
Like a an athletic kind of new age thing.
Yeah, but
it doesn't look like that.
That's the point. Is that you can wear a dress shirt, as I call them, or I guess maybe people wear them to work. But I usually wear them, like I say, to funerals, or occasionally I'll get invited to like a fancy thing. Not that often, but the Commuter collection is perfect for that. They've got great dress shirts. They've got great, incredibly comfortable pants that are fitted, but also stretch with you. Like I said, the dress shirts, they got 1/4 zips. They got polos. And here's the thing with the Rhone Commuter collection. Not only does it allow you to go from like one situation to another over the course of the day, not only does it feel like you're not wearing a constraining dress shirt, that it has flexibility, or your pants, you don't feel bound by them. You can go to these different events, and then at the end of this day, you don't smell bad because it has this Gold Fusion anti-odor technology. And frankly, like if I were to do more traveling, I don't know if I would have any other type of clothes. You don't need to iron this stuff, and it stays fresh for you can go multiple days with some of this. So you don't need a dry cleaner. It's fantastic. The Commuter collection can get you through any workday, straight into whatever comes next. Head to Rhone, RHONE.com/Majority Report. Use the promo code Majority Report. Save 20% off your entire order. All of those links will be in the podcast and YouTube description. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to writer and conflict analyst Hannah Rae Armstrong about the coup in Niger. We are back. Emma Vigeland, Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Joining us now from Dakar, Senegal, writer and conflict analyst Hannah Rae Armstrong, who has is in the region, obviously, in the Sahel, and to talk to us about the coup in Niger. Hannah, welcome to the show. Can you give us just sort of like, you mentioned before we came on, and Emma and I were confessing our ignorance about that region of the world, and Niger in particular. And you said, it really only pops up in American news every 12 years or so. There's been a series of coups in this country. Will you give us a sense of just sort of like some of the at least relatively recent history, or maybe even going back to the mid 20th century?
Sure. I will try to sum up. So there's this thing emerging in the region known as the Sahel, which is being called a sort of coup belt or a coup corridor. And that's playing on the idea that the region known as the Central Sahel, which is composed of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which is sort of the nucleus of a big kind of global war on terror conflict pitting Western states against Al-Qaeda and Islamic State affiliates. And so the trend for the past decade or so has been for Western forces to increasingly sort of invest in these countries and their fights against extremist insurgents. But as of 2 or 3 years ago, that trend has started to reverse as soldiers and military rulers have overthrown democratically elected, according to some, regimes in those countries. And so you had a series of coups in Mali and Burkina Faso, each of which has had 2 within the past couple of years. And the more coups sort of hit Mali and Burkina Faso, the more Niger stood apart as this sort of an exception, and was labeled as a sort of paragon of democracy in the region. The Western forces that were being displaced from Mali and Burkina Faso were increasingly moving into Niger to support Nigerian forces and to sort of carry on the same fight against extremist insurgent groups. And this put a lot of pressure on Niger. And ultimately, we had what happened a little over a week ago, which is the first sort of this round of coups has hit Niger.
We should just say the Sahel runs from Eritrea all the way across the African continent to Senegal, and it basically parallels the equator. And is it considered a region because of the? I mean, how is it organized as a region? Like, why do we? Is it just because of the specifically like the climate and the terrain, or what is it that makes that a region? Because it's such an odd, to my eye, anyways. It just seems to be an odd sort of configuration for a region.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very sort of nebulous concept. There isn't really an agreement on what the word Sahel really refers to. It has a kind of environmental and geographic definition, which has to do with how much grassland is present. It can be used to apply to areas as diverse as Eritrea to the east and Cape Verde to the west. But in recent years, it's really been kind of associated with a group of 5 countries that have been the sort of focal point of Western efforts to support counterterrorism in West Africa. And those 5 countries are the 3 I mentioned earlier: Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, along with Chad and Mauritania.
You said that allegedly or so-called democratically elected in Burkina Faso, I guess, and in Niger. I'm wondering if you could just elaborate on why so-called.
Yeah, well, I was specifically referring to Niger, but I mean it's apt for each of the countries. There's this sort of expectation that democratic elections and transitions can sort of take place, and there's a lot of support for these types of elections to take place. And the war on terror has kind of made it much more important for these types of transitions to take place and for elected leaders to be put into power for the purposes of sort of partnership. And this has led to a lot of sort of oversight and wishful thinking in terms of what these actual administrations are doing. And it's also led to their being a lot less accountable to their own populations and a lot more accountable to sort of foreign donors and military support. So in the case of Niger, for example, it's a really, it was touted as this sort of successful democratic transition, the first in the country's history. President Bazoum took over from his predecessor, who he was politically aligned with, and who he was basically chosen to handpick to succeed. And there were elections were held. There were irregularities. There were reports of fraud. The main opposition candidate was imprisoned on trumped-up charges. But in the end, the election was sort of seen as credible enough, given the needs of basically Western powers to continue working with the country. The bar was pretty low. So President Bazoum, in terms of how he came into power, it was sort of it has been exaggerated, the extent to which he was he could count as a credibly democratically elected leader, given how low the bar is. And since he came into power, he's actually done a pretty good job in certain areas. He kind of has a mixed track record. He has worked very hard to sort of cement partnerships with the United States and France. but he has also worked on security questions in the country and had some really positive results in certain areas. On the political front, he has sort of continued with his predecessor in terms of harassing and arresting journalists and bloggers who criticize or question some of his cabinet's moves, or who call for investigations into massive corruption scandals, and has done things like ban protests and sort of covered up or associated with really corrupt elites. So there's a really big sort of separation between how he's perceived on the outside and the types of rhetoric that we're hearing now from Secretary of State Anthony Blinken or from the French foreign minister, who are calling for his restoration as the representative of constitutional order, the guarantor of constitutional order, and how he's seen inside the country, which is much more nuanced and in many cases negative perception.
So just to catch people up, so Mamadou Issoufou, forgive me for mispronouncing all of these names. I can't pronounce much anyways. But he served 2 terms. There was a, peaceful transition of power by someone with arguably democratically elected. There was nearly a coup, though, right on the eve of the election. Was that my understanding? And the essentially the head of the security forces that protected the previous president stayed on and was in many respects sort of like instrumental in this coup going forward. Do we get a sense of how much of the interest that the Western that the colonial powers, frankly, have in Niger is a function of stuff like uranium, which I think is the biggest export from Niger, and how much of it is a way of maintaining some type of control over ISIS aligned groups or Islamist aligned groups that might destabilize the whole region? Or am I saying the same thing when I say those 2 things, essentially? Is that the same sort of incentive structure?
I mean, there are certainly, material interests, in terms of mining interests. Arguably it gets a little bit exaggerated to what extent France still holds on to close ties in Niger as a function of its dependency on uranium, which is mined in northern Niger, which happens to have a very refined source of yellowcake, which fuels much of the French power grid. In terms of, to what extent current policies are dictated by material interests like mining and extractive industry interests, or policy priorities like combating terrorism. I think it's helpful to sort of look at installations in the country. Northern Niger is the site of French uranium mining, and it's also the site of a relatively recent American Air Force base, as well as what's been reported on as a sort of CIA drone base a little bit further north of that. So it's obviously a very strategic area, both for France and for the United States. France, could France do without Niger's uranium? More so than is generally being acknowledged at this point. But at the same time, there is an interest in sort of keeping it out of the hands of other actors. And there's also a sense that uranium prices fluctuating as they do, the territorial arrangements that France has in northern Niger could become a lot more valuable in coming years. So for instance, after the Fukushima disaster, the price of uranium plummeted, and it's sort of stayed pretty low since then. And France has actually kind of drawn down its uranium exploitation in northern Niger. But that doesn't mean that it's willing to sort of give up this territory, and things could change and it could become a lot more valuable.
speaking of that, I mean, that sort of dynamic of controlling the spigot of these things, we may not need the uranium, but we want to make sure maybe the Chinese or the Russians don't get a hold of it, and them, turning that into either using it themselves or providing it to other governments. What is their presence there? Let's start with Russia, because it does have a feel of like a potential where this region could become even more of a proxy type of conflict. It seems like, because as far as I've read, it sounds like Russia has condemned the coup, but the Wagner Group is there supporting the coup. Is that the case, or did I misread that, or what are we to make from that?
That's almost right. There is this kind of strange dissonance between what the Russian Foreign Ministry has said about the coup, which is, as you say, condemning it. Wagner isn't yet in Niger, to my knowledge, but it has been kind of credibly reported that the junta leaders have met with Wagner in neighboring Mali, following the playbook of Mali and Burkina Faso. Shortly after military rulers toppled the elected governments, they also opted to sort of swap out France as their primary security partner with Wagner. What's kind of an open question is to what extent Wagner and the Russian Defense Ministry and the Russian state are aligned on this and working together on this. And it's not really clear yet what the answer to that is. But I think we can definitely see, Prigozhin was sort of congratulating Niger on its coup and calling it, an important sort of process of decolonization. And we know that the Wagner Group is certainly interested in finding new clients on the African continent that would provide it with money and, funds in terms of extractive resources. And in exchange, it can deliver security assistance. And what we've seen in Mali is that there have been some efforts to sort of try to use Wagner for counterterrorism purposes, but there's also a sense that they're functioning as a kind of Praetorian Guard and really protecting the military regime instead of working to consolidate security in the parts of the country that are dealing with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State.
Who else does France and the West not want to have access to that uranium? Just about everybody else, but I mean, I guess where is their from their perspective, who is the greatest concern?
I don't want to sort of make any statements about that right now because I'm not too up to speed on the latest. I believe China is actually mining uranium, or at least has a contract to mine uranium in northern Niger as well. As of a couple of years ago, I don't know where they're at with that now. They certainly wouldn't want it getting into Iranian hands, for example. There's an interesting observation if you look at the last coup in Niger, which was in 2010, I believe, and it was another one of these sort of what gets called a democratizing coup because it ended up being pretty popular and toppled, a ruler who was about to help himself to an unconstitutional third term. And the people welcomed it, and it was largely bloodless or entirely bloodless. But at the time, what he was doing was giving out a lot of uranium licenses, to prospecting licenses to foreign countries. So, there's a lot of French officials like to really sort of downplay the extent to which France depends on, the currency, the West African currency, whose reserves are held in French banks. Or uranium, which comes from northern Niger. But there's no question that these continue to represent significant strategic interests for France and are seen as sort of a Western, sort of buttress against foreign rivals.
So ultimately, what is the interest of the U.S. and the West to actually support, or how sincere is their support, I guess I should say, for the ousted President Bazoum, and what is that founded on? I mean, it sounds like the coup was perpetrated by, someone who had been in there for at least someone who had been protecting the prior president. Is it so? How sincere is there? Are these protestations, and what are they hoping? What is the U.S. and the West interest genuinely in terms of the outcomes here?
They're very sincere. President Bazoum is considered, was seen really as the perfect kind of leader. He was someone, he came from an ethnic minority in his own country. He was someone who was able to, he was a very skilled politician. I'm speaking of him like he's dead. I mean, he's still alive. He might be returned to power. I think it's increasingly unlikely. But he made a reputation for himself as a very skilled politician, as a very skilled diplomat, someone who was able to juggle a lot of very difficult competing interests. And he was, especially as Mali and Burkina Faso kind of crumbled to repeated military coups and their security situations kept degenerating. And Wagner started to move in Mali and perhaps into Burkina Faso. It hasn't been confirmed yet. It became sort of more and more important that Niger was, for the West and was a strategic partner of the West. So we are going to see some fighting to sort of resist Niger going down a similar path as Mali and Burkina Faso. It's really seen as sort of the nail in the coffin for the Western effort to intervene to sort of stabilize the Sahel, which by many measures already is long dead and buried. But that has yet to be sort of acknowledged or navigated. In terms of strategic resources and assets, the U.S. has these bases in northern Niger that mean that it has a particular interest in continuing to have a relationship with Niger. So if you look at the wording, the U.S. has yet to call what's happened a coup. They're still trying to sort of negotiate for Bazoum and ideally put him back in place, which I think it's much too late for now. But the base really sort of figures into it. It's not an easy country for the U.S. to disengage from.
And just to be clear, they can't acknowledge it being a coup because then it becomes a real problem to maintain these relationships. So when you say fight,
financial,
maintain the financial relationship. So how do you anticipate, if you don't think that Bazoum is going to be brought back into power, would the West and the U.S. Be able to get around the idea of a coup if there was some third party installed? Like, what happens next?
So far, I mean, there are a few possible outcomes. We've seen efforts for mediation, one of which has been led by the United States. They've been going very poorly. The one from the West African regional body started out with a very aggressive deadline, threatening to send troops if Bazoum wasn't restored within a week. That did not go down well or succeed. The deadline has passed. Nothing's happened, apart from sanctions, which punish the population. And in some ways sort of consolidate support for the military rulers by posing an external threat. Possible outcomes, what happened in Mali and Burkina Faso was that after the first coup, there was another coup. So, one possible outcome is once the sort of efforts to restore Bazoum, restore constitutional order, start to peter out. And also it bears keeping in mind that, the Sahel is really not a strategic priority globally for the United States. As important as the Northern Niger base or bases may be, compared to Ukraine and the Middle East, it remains pretty low on the totem pole. And attention is scarce. So, I think what's likely, I think the junta is here to stay. There's a lot of popular support in the streets. We're seeing big pro-junta protests and various factions kind of lining up behind them. They just named a prime minister who's a sort of palatable technocrat with great relationships with European financial institutions. So I think we're going to see them sort of, talk their way into legitimacy. And then it'll really be a question of how they navigate the problem of security partnerships, because it's impossible to ally with Wagner and France and the US at the same time. So, we may see attention sort of wane, and once the threat of intervention or sanctions is sort of lifted, that may bring out internal dissent among the putschists and sort of more competition for power. Another thing we might see is movements in northern Niger from factions that maybe are loyal to Bazoum or are loyal to France, or don't like the direction that things are taking. The area of northern Niger has a history of rebellion, which hasn't happened in the past couple of decades, which is kind of remarkable. But it certainly sort of starts to become a prospect if the capital is taken over by military rulers. It may mean that certain regions will start to have other ideas about how they want to be ruled.
What do you make of some of the reporting I saw out of The Intercept from someone like Nick Turse that it was Nick's reporting that some of these military leaders had received U.S. military training, or some of the military operators that participated in the coup?
There's no question that that's true. And it's sort of a trope at this point. Whenever there's a coup, that it gets kind of reported on that the U.S. trains these figures and knows these figures. I don't think it says what Nick Turse and The Intercept are trying to suggest that it says. It's certainly not. These coups and this upheaval and this type of unrest is really not in the U.S. interest at all. I think it speaks more to flaws in U.S. strategies for engagement with this region, which are extremely sort of military-led, and the types of relationships and investments that American leaders keep making and maintaining and thinking will pay off don't seem to be paying off in the way that they would like. There's without a question.
We train everybody, it feels like. Just to sort of like put our chips on, we're going to, it's like going to the roulette table, it feels like, and we're going to bet on every single bet there is. And usually that comes back to bite us a little bit.
Yeah, if you look at not only the coups, but also the human rights track records of soldiers who've been trained by Western forces, it's grim stuff. I think what it really sort of calls for is a rethink of types of military partnerships and engagement on the continent, and in particular this notion that counterterrorism and counterinsurgency require these types of military interventions, which in the Sahel have created so many more problems than they wanted to solve in the first place.
Hannah Rae Armstrong, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
All right, folks. We're going to take a break and head into the fun half. The School of the Americas. We would train everybody, all the worst sort of torturers and anti-democratic forces in
coup doers
in coup doers in Latin America. They were all of the same school. I think it was like in Georgia. It is.
Although I think
they closed it and changed the name of it. I don't know if they actually closed it, but they changed the name of it. I think it's now the Western Hemisphere for Institute for Security Cooperation.
I think that the sort of cooperation here was more beneficial to us than maybe the Niger. Like we actually had more interest in stoking and accelerating some of that.
That was when we were sort of interested in creating right-wing death squads. That was that's why people were up in arms about Elliot Abrams.
And I think even like to the Nick Turse point, I think Turse has even got into like saying like, I'm not saying that America is secretly behind all this. I just do mean to point out that like, hey, we're always training these situations, and does our investment in security actually lead to security?
Yeah, and I mean it's also, I just think, notable how present the United States' military operation is in Niger, and how little that's translated, and like the uranium exports, how little that's translated, I think, economically on the ground is a lot of what I've read. So that's U.S. empire, I guess.
We got what are we up to now? 800 bases around the globe, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we're like freaking out about China building like 4 more or something like that.
Before we go into the fun half, I just want to talk about this one story. In the ongoing sort of saga of, there are good sort of silos within the Biden administration, and we've talked about one of them being stuff like antitrust, and the other is labor. Notwithstanding Biden's essentially undercutting of the rail workers union in their bid to strike. And we should also say that Lever News has a great piece on how the rail safety bill, which came out of the accident in Palestine, Ohio, which was co-sponsored by J.D. Vance and I think Sherrod Brown. Also, there was another Democratic politician, I can't remember who it was, that had written this with J.D. Vance. Well, the Republicans have basically destroyed the ability of that to advance. It is not a bill.
Milking it for weeks and weeks
Yes.
for political gain.
There is not, Democrats do not have the ability to pass a bill on their own that is not done under a reconciliation process. And the only things that can be done under reconciliation are more budgetary and dealing with the revenue of the United States government or the expense of the United States government. The railway safety bill would have required more people working on a train, updating cars and technology on a more regular basis, et cetera, et cetera. Republicans quashed that. So we don't have that rail safety bill. Well, we'll see how that works out. In the meantime, the Department of Labor today is restoring some rules around the Davis-Bacon Act. That is an act which sets wage floors for construction workers on public works projects. Now, this is really, it's relevant just broadly speaking, but it's particularly relevant in the wake of the IRA and the infrastructure bill, because there's been a real boon in manufacturing and in constructing manufacturing plants. There's also been a big boon in infrastructure building, not just like solar and whatnot, but like roads and bridges, et cetera, et cetera. And the long and short of it is that Davis-Bacon, the way that it used to be prior to really like the Reagan era, but it was sort of, the ground was softened up under Carter. Carter was not terribly helpful for the unions. There was a big turn against the unions in the Democratic Party at that time, largely because Democratic primaries there were no primaries.
Yeah.
The way that that nominees were chosen was literally backroom deals with union leaders.
At least the unions were there.
And the unions were there, exactly. As opposed to Republicans who didn't it was just like 3 guys. But in the early 70s, under McGovern, the primaries were sort of taken out of that apparatus and given to a sort of a different apparatus, Nixon had more union support, not the least which a bit was a function of like the unions and union workers cleaving from like the hippies and the, emancipation movements. Nevertheless, the Biden Department of Labor proposed Davis-Bacon rule includes changes to enforcement, anti-retaliation provisions, and tools to hold contractors responsible for wage violations. It would explicitly include certain green job classifications under Davis-Bacon, including solar and wind, and it would change the department's reliance on survey data to set prevailing wages, in which case is decades old. In other words, it's going to update what prevailing wages are. If you work on a project that has any government funding under Davis-Bacon, you need to provide a prevailing wage. And how the prevailing wage, I could say prevailing wage. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. We can define it in a number of ways. We can do it as an average. So if construction workers make $50 an hour on 3 projects, but they're smaller projects, and then they make $15 an hour on a bigger project, the average is going to be brought way down. And that's the way that, particularly if you're working in the South, where you don't have as many union jobs, that's how prevailing wages were kept low there.
And wage theft in the construction industry, pretty prominent.
Extremely prominent. Of course, we were told the other day that wage theft is not really a crime.
It's mainly like government contractors or something.
More or less. So the department plans to reverse an 83 reform by President Ronald Reagan that disadvantaged union wage rates and made wage determinations correspond less and less to actual pay. Prior to the 1980s, a wage rate was considered prevailing if it was paid to at least 30% of workers in an area. The standard benefited workers who were paid collectively bargained rates, and it prevented contractors from undercutting the local workforce. In other words, unions would raise the wages. If no single rate was paid more to 30% of workers, the prevailing wage was determined by taking the weighted average of pay. In 82, the Reagan Department of Labor eliminated the 30% rule and replaced it with a majority requirement. 50% plus one worker must be making a wage for it to count as prevailing. So that way, in the absence of that, it became an average. And the Biden Department of Labor argues that using averages can drag down wages by allowing a single low-wage contractor to depress the wage rates on federal contracts below the higher rate.
That's why, averages, for example, on their face are usually less reliable indicators than, say, median.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's
classic case of Bill Gates comes in here.
Outliers
we are all millionaires. The average person in here is a millionaire.
Yeah.
I mean, a billionaire if he comes in. But the reality is a little bit different than that. So this is an important move. It'll, of course, be, challenged in the courts, and who knows? We've got the Fifth Circuit just basically said that Biden's Department of Education cannot relieve debt for students who were lied to by universities in terms of what the outcomes of them getting a degree would be. Now, this was standard fare during the Obama administration, and it has been heretofore considered uncontroversial. But again, we have a federal judiciary that is packed now with Trump appointees. 2 of the 3 on that panel were Trump appointees. The third was Bush. And it could go up to the Supreme Court. It probably will. Or they may not even take the case. It is impossible to understate the importance of a sympathetic federal judiciary when you are talking about material benefits for people in society that, I mean, I don't even know if structural benefits could take place, frankly, with the judiciary that we have. But when you're talking about a country that is so polarized, you're basically handcuffing the ability to provide any type of relief to people. The $360 billion in Biden's new student relief program, and we're going to see that challenge. The challenges have already more or less begun. The income-driven repayment plans, as kludgy as it is, and hoopy and all this stuff, the actual dollar amounts for people could be incredibly significant. You're going to get a lot of people who are going to have their debt wiped away. You're going to get a lot of people who are going to be paying considerably less on their debt. But regardless of whether, I would prefer to see let's just wipe it all out, frankly.
Well, yeah.
But the authority is to do so is really what the question is going to be. And I think these courts are just hell-bent on saying you can't do it. But we'll see. We're going to take a break, head into the fun half of the program. The number is actually 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920 is the number. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free half free of commercials, but you get the fun half. And then you also get to do things like IM us during the fun half. Here's an IM. Dope Hope. Sam, I know you don't pay attention to trials. Will you make an exception for the Trump trials? Perhaps even live commentary if they're broadcast? I think undoubtedly.
Yeah.
I mean, the Trump trials is not a typical thing. There are massive political implications.
It's purely political.
And a lot of this information is stuff that we've already discussed, and that's well established. It's been reported on. I mean, some of the indictment included the new, really disturbing Jeff Clark Insurrection Act stuff, but we knew a lot of these meetings had happened previously. The Jeffrey Clark meeting, or the Eastman meetings with Pence, we knew about. So it's different than commenting on say.
Well, even the Jean
police
Carroll
brutality trial where we don't have all the facts that the jury might have.
Or I mean, even the Jean Carroll suit is a perfect example. It involves Trump as a defendant. We will report on the outcome, but to follow the ins and outs of each of the trial, it seems largely irrelevant for the project that we have here. And I would even argue the stolen document trial, maybe that's also different because we're talking about operations of a president while he's a sitting president
and running for president.
And then, of course, running for president. But this is important. I mean, the idea that we hold the president to account for things like, laws that we would hold for things that have to do with the operations of our government and the future of democracy. The stakes and the nature of the situation is very different. So,
and I think we also, for the debates that are coming up, we're going to want to do some coverage of that as well. Just a heads up to the
without
audience.
a doubt.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that.
They're not broadcasting the Trump trial, are they?
They're hoping.
Are they?
Trump wants to. The Democrats want to. It's really, and this is doable because, again, despite Antonin Scalia, despite Scalito's, Sam Alito's protestations, Congress really does have the constitutional authority to regulate the courts, including the Supreme Court. And so if Congress says this case is going to be televised, guess what happens? This case gets televised. And so it really is up to the Republicans, but Donald Trump wants it.
Yeah.
And
the Republicans might want it too.
I suspect the leadership of the Republican Party is this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. Because, but Donald Trump wants it because it's going to make sure that he wins the primary and gets more money for his defense, right? He's going to use this to raise money. Remember, Donald Trump's defense in this, and we see it in the context of the motion that they filed, or they're asking of the judge. We want to be able to release the evidence that we get from the prosecution. We want to be able to release that. They're saying they're putting it in the context of Donald Trump. This is from from Politico. Donald Trump argued Monday that he should be allowed to share evidence in his latest criminal case with, quote, volunteer attorneys and other unpaid advisors as he prepares to defend himself against charges. Open source. That's exactly how I headlined it. He's like, volunteer attorneys aren't necessarily attorneys that have a degree, and other unpaid advisors. I want to send this out to Mike Cernovich and Jack Prosobiec and see what we can do.
My cousin Vinny situation.
The government cannot preclude the assistance of those individuals, nor should President Trump be required to seek permission from the court before any such individuals assist the defense. This is from his lawyer. I mean, the bottom line is they want to be able to use this because, remember, his defense here, and of course the prosecution is, we don't want him tried in the court of public opinion. That's not what this is about. One, if you have all this evidence, it's going to make it harder to find a jury pool that is you're going to have to sequester them, right?
Yeah.
Two, if you have all this evidence, Trump can use it in what his real defense is. And his real defense strategy is use the trial to get elected president and then pardon himself.
Mm-hmm. And all the while it's rigged against him because it's a black judge, black jury.
That's all part of it.
And no, how can you get a jury that's going to be unbiased because of all of the witch hunts against me? It's all rigged.
That's all part of it. And so this is part of his larger strategy. And so he wants it televised, whereas I would imagine the Republican sort of leadership does not. So
not the Republican part of the leadership that wants to move on from Trump.
I mean, moving on from Trump is really, I think all of them want to do that in some way just because there's less work for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just really, this is Coke and Pepsi. And, it's really like Coke, Pepsi, and some like, Coca-Cola, some cola company in, that is stationed in like, I don't know, Woburn, Mass. And it's just like, we're just hiring our buddies. We're not hiring any other soda guys. I'm hiring the guy that does my car. I'm hiring the guy that I, used to work with over in the mall at Spencer Gifts. And we're just going to run the whole soda business. And we're in charge of it now. And you guys who were working on Coke and Pepsi before, you're out of luck. And so they want to get back into the business. That's what's going on there. All right. We'll be right back. 646-257-3920. Oh, wait a second. Emma, what's happening on ESPN? I'm completely out of sorts.
Yeah.
You did a segment instead of the plug.
I don't know what's going on. I'm tired. I'm already, listen, my daughter's going to college.
Yeah.
She's turning 18 tomorrow.
Woo, wow.
Oh, wow.
How's that feel?
Her birth was announced on this show.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
That's crazy.
So,
how old was she when she recorded the thing at the start of the show? Like 7?
I don't know. I mean, maybe 4, 5.
That's so sweet.
Oh, God. And, I want to have Saul do it, but then I feel bad. Like Miles didn't, it's just. Go ahead, Emma. ESPN.
Yeah. Well, on ESPN, we spoke about the right-wing freak out, or actually, freak out is not the right word. Cheering celebration for the U.S. women's national team losing. as they have like Patriot in the bio. Bradley and I reviewed the Netflix quarterback series, which is pretty phenomenal, and gave our picks for NFL rookies with some fantasy upside. So if you're starting to do your drafts, check it out, youtube.com/ESPN show. We're going to try to have like a real fantasy expert on Monday.
It's very funny to celebrate the women's team like finally losing, because it's like if they would have won again, it would have just been like, yeah, I hate those.
They would have three-peated.
Yeah, exactly.
It's ridiculous.
Like eventually you have to lose.
Well, they were runner-ups in 2011. Then 4 years later they won. Then in 2015 they won. 2019 they won. And like they got eliminated in the round of 16 in an upset. But
But they hate America because they say trans people exist.
Right. And it's just crazy too. It's all these Team USA accounts and people just being like, haha, America lost. And it just goes to show these guys, their conception of what patriotism is not about the country. It's about this very hyper-masculine, white, patriarchal conception of nationalism.
Yeah, it's so funny. They pretend to like women's sports, and then like actually you're just looking for
that too.
And it's like all right, we're gonna stand up for women's sports when a trans person is in the vicinity, but every other time it's WNBA is nobody watches it jokes.
And they literally are mocking Rapinoe for supporting trans women in sports. But anyway, check out ESPN for all this.
Tonight on Left Reckoning, Cale Brooks, we're talking about a piece he did in Compact Magazine on no growth. We're getting into no growth. How to me, it's whether or not the physics are dire enough. It just seems like a technocratic approach to things, and it just doesn't really move me. But Cale gets into actually, it's not really sound economically either. So Patreon.com/Left Reckoning for the post game tonight.
All right, quick break. Fun half. 646-257-3920.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back. Just wanna degrade the white man. Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder, what a fucking nut.